Good afternoon on what is a mild, bright and sunny day. It is Friday, January the 6th. I'm in the reading it with a nice hot cup of tea. And a box, if I can get to it. There we go. To the box. Where's the knife? Let's get the knife. To this. There we go. Comes out nice and easy. Quite open. There's that bit at the end. What have I got in here? I've got a big bundle of books. I'm going to lift that over out of the way. And I've got on box here is this, which is Devil's Run, role-playing game core book for the post-apocalyptic vehicular mayhem, and this is a Savage Worlds setting, and it's also it's actually by Savage Worlds and 2D20. Okay, so and it's basically published by Red Scar and Wordforge Games through Modifius Entertainment. So when the gangs tear up the freeway, choose a side, fight, survive. Two great nations that were destined to never find peace disappeared overnight. One is now an irradiated hot zone where nothing survives. The other is a sparsely populated wasteland that has plummeted into anarchy and chaos. Water, gas and food are the only currencies that matter on a continent ruled by bullets, balls and bloodshed. The Devil's Run role-playing game puts you into the driving seat of a post-apocalyptic future in which gang warfare dominates. The rules of the road are none. All you need to ask yourself is, what would you kill for? What would you die for? How far are you willing to fall to survive? What it offers is high-octane action fueled by rules for two turbo-driven systems. This core book contains the full system for the 2D20 rule set, plus mechanics to risk the Devil's Run using the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition system. A brief history detailing the collapse of civilization as we know it, stretching from before the launch that started it all to the current state of the world 20 years later. Detailed descriptions of the former West Coast, including descriptions for several of the larger factions that battled to dominate its war-torn highways. Tips and tools designed to help GMs create interesting runs, plus a chapter dedicated to the various allies and enemies that might help or hinder a run. The rules of the road offer some structure to the post-apocalypse, an overview of the world at large, and a few remaining superpowers that strive for dominance over rapidly dwindling resources. A complete toolkit of vehicles, weapons and gear designed to get the characters ahead to the pack in the post-apocalyptic future of the Devil's Run. So this is now available through Nightfall, I believe. So we open up, and what we've got is sort of like an overview of San Francisco and the areas dominated by various factions, whether it's free or dominated by the teams or the bikers, law, justice, Brit attack, and so on. We have that interesting image of essentially vehicular combat marked with someone dressed as death, vehicle combat there, sort of like something roaring up behind you, almost a la the truck or drive, or basically the film with Dennis Weaver that Steven Spielberg made, essentially has his first film for television. If you've not seen it, it's really tense. Got the forward here, and essentially combat like this really has kind of been a feature of sort of the hobby and role-playing games, and it's all down to one thing, and that's the Mad Max series of films, of vehicular mass combat, taking your ordinary car, souping up the engine, supercharging the engine, putting better brakes on, better tyres and so on, spikes, spikes on the sides to basically rip the rubber from your opponent's tyres, a machine gun on the nose to cut your opponent down as you chase up behind him, a mine or oil slick dispenser at the back to drop munitions to hinder them getting that close, and the like. And the best, most well-known version of that is Car Wars, of course, from Steve Jackson Games, and that's been going since 1980. That's such a long-running game system, and it's been really popular over the years. Come out with different editions, and the other thing is also there was Dark Highways or Dark Future. Games Workshop did like a board game, a miniatures combat game similarly, and there are various other role-playing games that have kind of touched upon it as an option for your post-apocalyptic genres, because in general your post-apocalyptic genre will mix and match a lot of things, and vehicular combat is one of them. But this in particular focuses on that subject in particular. So what else have we got in here? Open up with a bit of fiction after the forwards. And there's a short story by Harlan Ellison which really kind of inspires this genre as well. That's the other inspiration. And then we get to Welcome to Hell. And this is setting the stage, what you'll need, the Savage Apocalypse, and essentially laying out the game, what it's about, what it's like. And there are even elements of this in the cyberpunk setting, because beyond the cities it's kind of a wasteland, and you've got to go and drive in convoys, and there are marauders there, and so on. And we've got an end to order, essentially end of the sort of like to history, and the order as we know it, between the big two superpowers. But it kind of focuses upon on the West Coast, because the thing is that the advantages, of course, of the American setting is that it has a road system that is quite extensive. It's large, it's wide, and lots of it's also runs through open spaces and so on. So there's a lot of sort of sense of isolation and places to range as you go about your as you make your run between locations. So when we get into the timeline, which begins 32 years before the apocalypse. So this could be now. The apocalypse could be the apocalypse could be sort of like these events could start happening now, and then the apocalypse happen 32 years into the future. So you've got this extensive timeline, setting everything up, and then bringing it all down essentially. Then we look at the factions, explaining who they are, how you join, and then how to do that in Savage Wars. Let's go do this again with each of the different factions. And essentially in a broken America. I mean, I was at another role playing, another setting that does this in a similar fashion is Shadowrun does that with the breakup of America, and also Crimson Skies, which is the other, which is the post World War I breakup into sort of like aerial focused nations, and it's a really fun setting which never quite got a role-playing game it kind of deserved. We have Brit Attack. Oh, excuse me. So we have a sort of like very British looking kind of vehicle there. Could be a Mini, for example. Freelancers. Moore's Angels rather than Hell's Angels. Was it Moore's? Was that Hall's Angels? So they're basically, they're coming out of the trucker tradition kind of thing, as you can see there. So they're driving big rigs. And the other cue for this, I said Mad Max, is not just Mad Max, the 1981 version, Mad Max 282, but you're also looking at sort of like the remake with Tom Hardy, which is really good. Really good whether you're watching it in colour or black and white. That's a really terrific kind of film. Then the Law Haulage Company. Seven Fires. All these different factions are available. The teams. And of course, the player characters, they get to join one of these. They can ally with it. They can be freelancers themselves. Then we have the Vikers. And we've got an Osprey Beetle craft, and basically amazing that one of those is still kind of running. And that looks to be sort of like something similar, essentially adapted from like a BTR or BMP Soviet armoured personnel carrier. Then we have factions, how to create a character. So you build the archetype, and you've got guidelines in here for random archetype as well. And you take it through step by step. All the way up through equipment. Then we've got sort of like a guidance on how to humanise the apocalypse. That'll be interesting. And then, I mean, even you've got essentially the genre sort of like crossed over to things like fighting fantasy back in the day, because Steve Jackson of Steve Jackson Games, not the British one, wrote Freeway Fighter for the Fighting Fantasy series, and that then was inspired a number of other things in itself. More recently, a graphic novel, 4-part graphic novel from Titan as a publisher, I think. Then we can have group backgrounds, so building the sort of like your player characters around a group. And we have skills and talents. And this will be familiar to anyone who has played a 2D20 system. We'll list of sort of like talents for example. That's the acrobatics, agility talent. Let's see if I can find something that's a bit more. That's command, counsel, drive. So there isn't actually a list of talents for drive, but there is for, say, for example, engineering. That's much more appropriate because you want to be able to fix things. So on, yeah, and things like gang warfare talents, heavy weapons. Insight, medicine, law, I mean, they're all there. And again, familiar if you have played a 2D20 system role-playing game. This one is going to be somewhere, I think, pitched along the lines of looking at the degree of complexity, probably lying at the more slightly complex end, not as complex probably as Mutant Chronicles, but more like, say, Conan. But again, the 2D20 system itself is not really that complex. A game, you know, it's just making an adjustment to play. I've played a few games of it. Conan, John Carter of Mars, and the Klingons setting for Star Trek, and all really enjoyed it. Then we get on to gear and merch, or merchandise. So discussion of dollars versus merchandise. So you've still got a currency, but again, I suspect that potentially a lot of cases is that a script? Is that currency worth it when I can just barter and know that I'm going to get what I value? So you have things like hand crank and solar generators, food and water, road rations, all considered here, all necessary for a post-apocalyptic role-playing game. So all quite detailed. Drugs and diseases, of course, are going to be a danger, and drugs are going to be in desperate demand because people are not going to be manufacturing them. The manufacturing base is going to be destroyed. And then we get on to things like armour and weapons. and so on. So whether it's heavy machine guns, miniguns, flamers, rockets and RPGs, light machine guns, those are the things you're going to be arming your vehicles with. And even got some wild tech in there. Here we've got the gear and weapons summary tables. Now, curiously, one of the things you don't see a lot, kind of like is in the D20 system, or really very much in the 5th edition, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition OGL kind of world. There isn't as much of sort of like the post-apocalyptic. There's a bit, but it's not something that people necessarily sort of like run off and explore at their leisure with that. Here we've got the melee system. Although in the past, Wizards coasted like a D20 system, a post-apocalyptic supplement. Bit shy of content, but it is there. And in general, you'll find that a lot of the OSR kind of stuff does more the kind of gonzo stuff that comes from Gamma World and the like. So then we get on to handling conflict and drama. This is the meat of the game. This is how you run it. The foundations. This is the mechanics. This is completely standalone. Don't need any other rules, except of course if the 2D20 system for Savage Worlds Adventure Edition, then you're going to need those core rules, but they're easy to find and fantastic. I get through to page 178, 179. I have an example of play. It's a bit dense. It's probably going to be a bit difficult to read because of that, but it's there. And as I keep saying, I do like a good example of play. I want to see what the designer has envisioned in designing this game. What's their idea of how it should be played out, how the mechanics work, and see that in play. Essentially, the role-playing games are mostly a lot of telling you how to do things. The example of play is where the designer essentially sits up and says, "Okay, I've taught you how to do it. Now I'm going to show you." So this covers everything from movement and terrain, damage from falling, all that you would expect. Stealth, observation technique, and then we get on stealth, attacks, and so on, and combat. So nothing really out of the ordinary, really, for a 2D20 system, except you do have to take into account essentially stress and harm as part of the damage. So, yeah, it's just. Then we get on to basically, we even have a bit of steampunk in there before we get on to vehicular mayhem. So we're talking about vehicle types, vehicle profiles, how to operate a vehicle. In often cases, things like this can be the most complex part of playing a role-playing game. So, for example, if you're playing the Star Trek role-playing game from Modiphius, for the D20 system, handling that and running that is often the most complex bit of playing the game. But we've got rules in here for vehicle combat momentum, going out of control, and then we have to add in aircraft because, if you remember, Mad Max 2, you had the guy with the auto gyro as well, so that's figured in. And then we have rules for pursuits, so chases, because a signature feature of car combat, because essentially you're trying to catch up with someone or trying to get away from someone, that sort of thing. Adding upgrades. Whether that's running boards, smoke screens, gang colours, oil slicks, and so on. And then we have the stats, including the mini-like vehicle, classic kind of a sort of like a American muscle car, motorcycles, trikes, trucks, vans. And then what you can buy, of course, at the chop shop. where you can cut up, get bits and pieces you can buy that have been cut off other vehicles, and then rules of the road. So part of the run, 3 steps to game mastery. So this is all really for the referee. So rules here for scanning skill tests. It isn't, again, you've got a lot of information in here. Ideas of rolling, so basically playing fair, failing forward, handling momentum, the fallout, and so on. And things like handling things like as a role-playing game, not necessarily versus player. So fallout is essentially the result of what happens. And it's essentially the tool that the game master has to spend to add drama and intrigue and excitement to the game, to put challenges in front of her player characters, but not necessarily impede them per se. And then it's handling things like salvage points, trafficking activities, scavenging, all in there. All the rules you're going to need. Events table for when you're trafficking stuff. And then allies and adversaries. We have different categories and fields of expertise. So we have things like, we've got animals in there, beasts, so jaguars, vultures, and then human foes, so bandits and berserkers and the like. Cultists, cult leaders, ferals. Sadly, these are not all illustrations. That's a bit of a disappointment, but there we go. Pirates, so road pirates. So lots of diversity in terms of threats. So there's, you always need a good stack of enemies to throw at your played characters to keep things fresh. And you've got the hunters, bounty hunters or something like that. So these are like the major sort of gangs, I suppose, or other organisations and members. So Los Nigromantes, the Skinners. That doesn't sound well, does it? So we've got living legends, basically the pinnacle of those running the road, including the king. So we've got the gentleman, including his vehicle, King Chrome, and then Raoul, white hair. And they've just got the stats and eyes for essentially. So that's all for the 2d20 system. Then you've got them for the Savage Worlds as well. So they're all in there as well. And then index and appendices, things like changing it up, and just extras. And then conversion rules for the vehicles and more. So on, just extras in there at the very end. So no scenario, but again, in something like this, in sort of like you've got kind of like a rich background, you can easily come up with things. Then you've got index, and that's everything necessary, plus of course issue. So yeah, that is Devil's Run role-playing game core book for post-apocalyptic mayhem. Vehicular mayhem. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed this unboxing in the Nook. If you have, please do click on the like button down below. And of course, if you've got any comments or feedback, I do appreciate you taking the time to post those. And lastly, if you want to be alerted to get more unboxings in the Nook, where you see me out here with a box containing a book or game which I will unbox and chat about to the best extent of my knowledge for roughly 10 minutes or so, all of course accompanied by a nice hot cup of tea, then please do hit that subscribe button down below. Thanks again for watching another unboxing in the Nook. I'll be back again soon with another one. Bye for now.